Hi there. Welcome to Storytime. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. So that's why I'm doing these story times. I am reading through passages to talk about what's going on. Have an honest conversation with the passages, what they're teaching people to think and believe. Sometimes just vocalizing that it's okay to not agree with what you're finding here, and it turns out that people from all kinds of backgrounds find this kind of helpful. So if you are finding it helpful, I would love it if you would share a link with a friend and let them, enjoy some of this insight as well. Thanks so much for all of you who are here today live, who are able to be here, who want to and are able to be here. Thank you to everyone who's going to be watching later for joining us and checking out what I'm trying to offer today. So today's topic, I was looking at the most recent live story time that was just me instead of me interviewing someone, and in that exchange near the end, we looked at the role of the devil in Jesus's story, and it was not my intention was not to get into all of that, but it is kind of fun to look at that through new lenses, which is that the role of the devil character in Jesus's temptation story, I think ought to be read more of in light of seeing this character as really important, not as being an a-hole, right? But as actually like the reader needs to know that their hero is up for the task ahead, right? And so, yes, the devil has the role of testing Jesus, not being an asshole, trying to lead him astray. No, that comes out of a lot of Christian issues with trying to grasp this element of there being evil in the world and putting a lot of kind of anthropomorphized ideas onto a spiritual being, right? In light of this ongoing struggle about the reality of there being people do bad things, evil thing. This issue of good and evil. I don't like dualisms, but that's what's going on. Christians have been taught to think of the devil as out to get us. And so looking at the role of the devil in Jesus's, the temptation story in the desert at the beginning of his story, brought up this realization that talking about Satan or this character Hasatan in the Bible would probably be really helpful. So I think I'm actually going to list this not just under story time, but also Does the Bible Tell You So? That little series that I have not done much with lately, but does the Bible tell you so? Is Satan what should I say in that thumbnail? Is Satan a jerk? Like, is Satan out to get us? Does the Bible tell you so? So actually, the character or this person, this character, I'm just going to keep calling it a character, has a really interesting story or history, and starting in the Hebrew Bible. So we're going to spend most of the time looking at those passages, and that will culminate in looking at Job chapters 1 and 2, hopefully through a new lens for you, or through a lens that maybe you haven't thought about in terms of reading that particular big story. Let me center this so I'm looking at the camera. Okay. So we're going to do a different kind of story time. We're going to do we're going to jump around a little bit, looking at several verses just in context to see how this word is used. I'm going to do a little thanks for being here. Okay. So yes, that's what we're going to do. And I have all the passages that I want to look at with you quoted or referenced in a slideshow. First, let me, I was telling my parents, I try to check in with them since I'm living nearby to try to help support them in their octogenarian years. And I was, telling them I was going live today, and Mom's like, "What's your topic?" And I was like, "Oh, Satan." Which my mother's a former pastor, so this is not normal to her to want to be excited about talking about Satan. I, however, think it's very fun. And her response was, "Well, did you see Doonesbury on Sunday?" Which I don't read the comics very often, only if someone points one out to me. So she went and found it, and it is worth sharing. So I'm gonna share this first, and maybe we'll come back to it at the end. I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to share the Doonesbury strip. Okay. Can you see that? Oh, let's see if I can do something better with that. Get rid of the Clarks. I don't know if we can actually get rid of the Clarks thing or not. No, probably not. But the Sunday paper that I saw didn't have these first two the first two boxes. It just had the other 6. So let's look at this together, just very briefly. Doonesbury. So this is, you can't see it yet, but there are 2 little kiddos in the back seat. Daddy, why do we have to go to church? Because it's Sunday, buddy. Trump doesn't. He needs to rest on Sunday like God did. Daddy, why doesn't Trump ever go to church? He doesn't need to, sweetheart. He was sent by God. Should have commented on Doonesbury before we jumped into this, so we'll circle back to that. But why would God send someone so selfish and mean? Yeah, and someone who lies and cheats, stuff we get punished for. Go over to this and scroll up. And then Mom chimes in, no one's perfect, kiddos. God sent us a flawed messenger to remind us of our own sins. So obviously this is a car with Republican parents, right? Showing us how they manage this or whatever. But then what's the difference between Trump and someone Satan would send? I love this, right? And this is what made my mother very uncomfortable. She's still very uncomfortable, actually. She's like, I don't know what to do with this because this makes me very uncomfortable. So the mom replies, Satan's guy would be 3 years older, honey. Obviously implying Biden. And he'd over-rely on teleprompters, which is just funny since, we really do wish that Trump would actually use teleprompters. That he would stick to them more closely so that he might actually sound intelligent. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if any of you all saw that on Sunday, but it's always fun when something from biblical contexts and passages shows up in the everyday culture. I actually, in my Hebrew Bible online courses, I always ask students to look for this kind of a thing. And I have them find 2 examples, various parts of our world, whether it's the branding of food, such as there's a brand of chips and crackers called Garden of Eden, EATIN, apostrophe. So play on Garden of Eden. Apple and Eve apple juice brand, like that's hilarious because it's not biblical, but it kind of is, and it right takes so all kinds of stuff. Branding, the brand of suitcases, Samsonite, right? Play on words with Samson's name, very strong, durable, blah blah blah. So I just, and then I had one student many years ago, 6 years ago, took this course, and she has been sending me stuff from comics ever since. And she literally it really hadn't clicked for her how often she saw that in the comics, right? Some sort of reference to a biblical passage, especially Genesis, Eden, something like that. But it's fascinating. So in case you don't know, Doonesbury is kind of one of the more critical thinking comic strips out there, I would say. And my sense is I'm guessing the guy who writes this is neither believes in God nor Satan, right? Just so we're clear, right? So fun little play on that one, I'd say. Yeah. So what is the role of this character, Hasatan? So you guys are already having a fun little exchange amongst yourselves, which is great. I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to jump into, let's see, anything else I need to announce before I do this? I just realized I stopped doing like announcements at the beginning. And so let me do a quick little plug, a couple little plugs. I was asked to, and I lost my little Post-it. Where did it go? I don't know where it went. Sorry about that. I had a Post-it up for, here it is. BahaCon, so Blue Water Atheists, Humanists, and Agnostics, April 1st. So there's an online conference essentially for some atheist, humanist, and agnostic thinkers. If you're interested in joining them, you can just search for that, BAHACon. I'll just put that in the comments. It's not like I'm not endorsing it because of it in particular. I just was on a stream and they asked if we'd Oh my gosh, that is so fun. I'm so sorry, but I am gonna share this comment that just crossed my mind or crossed the screen here. Um, that makes me happy for some reason. Okay. So Baja Khan. Also, I don't know if everyone knows, but I have like a professionally developed podcast called Wild Olive. Game-changing conversation about literature, culture, and the Bible that I co-produce. I create content with a literature professor at Columbia College just outside in Chicago. She teaches the Bible as literature. I obviously teach the Bible as academic content, and we have really fun conversations. And we started doing lighter, like more cultural, like current cultural events. Like we did one on Barbie, the movie Barbie, and we most recently did one on the Killers of the Flower Moon. And it was a fun one to do. It's intense content, but it's also something that I think a lot of people are interested in, talking more honestly about the role of Europeans coming to this country, the role of Christianity in justifying the dehumanizing treatment, the kidnapping, the enslavement, the slaughter, near genocide of so many peoples. We also end up, the next 2 episodes coming out are engaging a memoir called Bad Indians, which is just beautiful and very difficult and fantastic in and of itself. So we did 2 different conversations with that particular memoir. So if you're interested in a little bit more kind of curated thoughtfulness about engaging the Bible, that's what we do at Wild Olive. It's very much an interest. It comes out of an interest of showing people more than one way to engage biblical passages, in particular trying to challenge the idea that you can only read it through a literalistic lens, reading it as literature, as myth, and the way we do it by engaging poetry or literature, movies, things like that, I think helps us see there's an element or there's a thread that connects us to these ancient people, not in a way that we need to hold on to literalistically, but that these stories can help shine a light on the humanity of these ancient people that we can potentially still relate to if one is so inclined. So anyway, I just wanted to give a plug for that. It's very, very pleased with our conversation about Killers of the Flower Moon. And I feel like I should have a link to that. It's actually in the description to all of the live videos. I put the link to Wild Olive in that description. So if you're interested. What else do I need to update you on before we get into stuff? I think that's it for now. Next week, we have a conversation with another scholar, New Testament scholar, Katie Valentine, and I'll put up the thumbnail soon for that. I just put up a link in my Patreon account for those of you who want to join us for the live conversation. I put up a link asking for like what topics you might want to engage if you wanted to come join us. So yeah, you can go check that out. I put that link in the community tab. I think that's it. I think it's time to get over here and talk about Hasatan. So let's do that. Google Slides. I thought I already did this part. My apologies. Let's see. Yep. There we go. Sorry about that. I thought I had uploaded everything and I had not. So let's see. There we go. Oh, right. Okay. So a few notes on Satan. So here's the thing. When we're looking at this noun in the Hebrew Bible, we need to start there, of course. So the noun in the Hebrew Bible is Satan. It's a noun. It isn't necessarily a name. So when I look at the Brown Drivers Briggs, the BDB, Hebrew English Lexicon, this is what most people, at least most people that I know of and who are going to seminary anywhere around the world, actually, in a seminary that's Christian related, you'll have this. I don't know what dictionary Jewish people use, or like at a Jewish seminary. I'm not sure what they use, but I'm pretty sure it's not this one because this is put together by Christian men who had very good intentions. So the thing is, when you look at the entry in this dictionary for the noun Satan, that's right here. There are two definitions. One that is adversary, and the second is the name Satan, Satan. Now, what's tricky about this to me is that several of the uses of Satan in the category number one really is an adversary. But when you look at the role of the characters, like when you're just using it as a name for a specific being, right, embodied being, not describing someone as an adversary, right? But when it's a character, he's not always, and in fact, the most important passage, the one in Job chapters 1 and 2, not an adversary at all. And this is why I mentioned this briefly at the end of the last time I was doing, just a me conversation on live stream, that I had an exchange with the editor, the person I was working with for my second book, Permission Granted, when I wanted to try to describe and talk about Hasatan in one of the sidebars in my book. And she was saying, well, but Satan means adversary. I'm like, no. Well, it does sort of, but not entirely. And so there's so many layers to this in a very fascinating way, I think. So something to look at. Let's look at this briefly. I have the verses listed, and in this case, Numbers 22, chapter 22, verses 22 and 32. It's almost the same kind of an idea. So I only have one of them copied in here. But if you want to go look them up, I promise you, I'm not being misleading. I'm trying to just pull out what's being said and showing you some of what the Hebrew is. Not that I expect that you all that everyone knows how to read it, but if you're interested in following along, some people might be able to because your familiarity with stuff. So just doing what I can here to try to bring it to light for you. Okay. So in Numbers chapter 22, verse 22, right, I didn't pull the whole context. So God's anger was kindled because this is a story about Balaam, however you want to pronounce it, and this is the story where his donkey speaks to him, right? I mean, so there's an element of suspending disbelief that often happens here for a lot of people. Like people who grow up, who hear about this story as a child, will forget to revisit that as an adult and kind of had this lingering, oh, sure, God spoke to him through a donkey. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oh my gosh, I've never stopped to think about that fact, but this is just ridiculous. Okay, so God's anger was kindled against Balaam because he was going down this road to go do this thing. And the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. And so what I pulled out of the Hebrew here is the yatsav right here is the verb, and this verb yatsav only shows up in this form. It's called the hithpael. So vayit yatsev, and this is the word for messenger, malach. Sounds a lot like melech, but different. Malach is a messenger, and this is the tetragrammaton, I'm going to pronounce it. I don't mean to offend anyone, but Yahweh, actually, in this case, Yahweh. B'derech le Satan lo. So this is, so the messenger set himself against, essentially, messenger of God, set himself against in B'derech, in the road. Le is like as or to, as an adversary to him. That's what that says, that phrase, right? So and the angel of the Lord took its stand in the road as his adversary. So the angel is standing against Balaam and his progress to this city, right? And the donkey can see the angel and Balaam can't. And so the donkey tries to avoid it 3 different times and ends up kind of injuring Balaam it's just this funny, why are you beating me up? Don't you trust me? You've ridden me your whole life. And now all of a sudden you're beating me up because I'm doing something, but I'm trying to protect you. And so there's a little exchange. Okay. The angel of the Lord is an adversary. preventing Balaam from doing what he's doing. That's it. That's what that is, right? That is standing in the way, angry at him, trying to keep, however you want to look at that. The dictionary definition, by the way, I will say, they have several references to Aramaic and Arabic, and some of those, at least taken in their context, which I can't reference. I can read Aramaic, but not Arabic. But this concept of being remote, especially from the truth and from the mercy of God, which is kind of interesting. So that's not what's going on here, right? This is standing in the way is really just some form of an adversary, however you want to think about that. It hindering his progress, right? Because God is angry at him, trying to keep him from doing this thing. Whatever you want to make of that. So these are, so then the next three, so two of them, I'm going to share the tab, and I'm not sure if it's going to, I think I actually have to share that separately. So let's, 1 Samuel 29:4. Samuel 29. Let's do that. How are we doing? Yeah. Okay. So, so I pulled this whole thing up. If you're interested, but it doesn't really matter. But sometimes it helps people to kind of see what we're talking about here, right? So now the Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, while the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" It's interesting, too, that they're still being called Hebrews, right? Even though they've kind of long since become Israelites, right? So it doesn't matter. Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of the king Saul of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." So is this guy just clueless? Is David blowing smoke up his butt so he can get in? And anyway, but the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, big idiot. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in battle." Okay, and it's that same Hasatan there. He may become an adversary to us in the battle. How could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord, right? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Like, you can't serve two different, right? And then we have this celebration of David, which is interesting because, anyway, this is shared. Saul has killed his thousands. David is 10,000s elsewhere, kind of in Saul's own face, actually. So anyway, so right, you don't want your enemy fighting in your midst, because then he might at a very important moment turn against you. Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. And that is what's being said here, right? He may become an adversary to us, right? So that's Hasatan, okay, in that case. And then we're going to go back over to 2 Samuel 19:22. So same collection. So if you don't know that from a Jewish perspective, the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel are one book. It's just Samuel. And Christians break it up into two just due to the length of having two shorter scrolls, basically. So 2 Samuel 19, but that's how I know to label them and look them up in my Bible. So forgive me or bear with me on that. 2 Samuel 19. Okay, let's do this. Verse 22. And this is similar, actually. I mean, it's the same. Obviously it's not the same story. It's later. Obviously, it's the next book, so it's many chapters later story. But it's a similar kind of a thing. Down here's verse 22. But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should today become an adversary to me?" And I thought I had the parallels for that. Let's see what happens if I do. It's the same Hasatan, just so you know. It's the same adversary, right? This first definition of Hasatan as an adversary. Okay. And come back over here. And then, excuse me. So 1 Kings 11, verses 14 and 25. I just have one. Oh, wait, no, I did. Oh, yep. I didn't find it in 14, actually. I spent some time and I thought maybe there was a typo in the dictionary. I'm not sure. But it does say, it does have that listed as a sorry. Nope, that's a typo in my slide. Anyway, it was 1 Kings 5:18. I couldn't find that. Sorry, that's a little bit mixed up. 1 Kings 11:23 and 25, not 14 and 25. Okay. So again, if you wanted to look it up, you could do that if you want to go see greater context. But again, it's a similar thing going on here, right? God raised up another adversary against Solomon. So again, Vayakim Elohim. So and God put in place lo Satan. So to or against him, Satan. So God set against or to him a Satan, some sort of adversary. And then here's the name. And this English translation, they provided the name Solomon. It's against him. God raised up another adversary against him in the Hebrew there. That's what this is, set against him. Lo, that's against him. So a Satan, and then this is the name of the person, which I didn't include in copying the English here. So again, this is God setting a Satan, a Satan, right? An adversary, and God is doing this, right? This is right. I mean, this isn't a supernatural being. This is a human who God is using, right? Manipulating, putting in the way of his own people. Like, it's really interesting, right? That God is using these people, these characters, these humans in the story, right, to mess with or teach his people a lesson or to challenge them or whatever. But it's fascinating, right? And again, so the same chapter, the end of this section, same kind of a thing, kind of wrapping up that story about Rezon ben al-Yadad. So he was an adversary. Vayhi Satan. He was an adversary. Lo Yisrael kol yemei Shlomo. He was a Satan, an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon. Okay. And then we have Satan as Satan. That was supposed to be lowercase right there, but Satan is Satan. And so there are two quick ones. 1 Corinthians chapter 21, verse 1. So 1 Chronicles chapter 21. So this is a late revisionary storytelling of the whole of the kind of the narrative, the biblical narrative. It's take two. It's a lot of spin. The things that David does that are not quite as pleasing to a lot of people are edited out. So the whole thing with Bathsheba does not make it into Chronicles. So it's political spin. So this is an interesting one. I wonder, maybe I should open up 1 Chronicles 21, because what's happening here is that, yes, you do have in the Hebrew, so Hasatan stood Vayamod Satan, not Hasatan, Vayamod Satan al Yisrael. So Satan stood against Israel. And then what I didn't copy was the Hebrew for this, and incited David to count the people of Israel. So this is the part in the story where I don't know for sure. I think it's a bit of hubris or arrogance on David's part. He's counting for reasons that displease the Lord. I don't know. Should I go open a tab so we can look at that together? Might be helpful, huh? Let me see. It is 1 Chronicles 21:1. Okay, 1 Chronicles 21. All right, so we're going to go over here, present that. Yeah, the census and plague, go number So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, "Go number Israel from Beersheba to Dan and bring me a report so that I may know their number." But Joab said, "May the Lord increase the number of his people 100-fold. Are they not, my lord the king, all of them my lord's servants? Why then should my lord require this? Why should he bring guilt on Israel?" Why are you bringing guilt on Israel by counting them all? I don't remember the specifics, to be honest, and I didn't think to read prior to this, but you can go look it up later if you want. But the king's word prevailed against Joab, right? So Joab departed and went through all Israel, and came back to Jerusalem, and he gave the total count of the people to David. In all Israel, there were 1,100,000 men who drew the sword, and in Judah, 470,000 who drew the sword. But he did not include Levi and Benjamin. The king's command was abhorrent to Joab. He's being disobedient in some way that I don't recall. Let's see if it's probably says at the very end of chapter 20. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. No, it's not. So anyway, there you have it. I'm in the wrong tab. Where'd you all go? Where'd you go? Yeah. So Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to count the people, right? So Zechariah 3:1 is another passage that I think I have the parallels open on that. Zechariah 3. Yes, I do. Okay. Let's see. Zechariah 3:1. So it's the very opening of it. Okay. Then he showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the Lord, the angel of the Lord, and the accuser standing at his right hand to accuse him. And what's interesting is this noun, which is how it's kind of the opposite of how it normally works. Normally you start with a verb, and you get the noun from the verb. And that is not what's happening here. So I think that just means that there is a verb form, but that is not as common. So anyway, when it says to standing his right hand to accuse him, the Hebrew here is omed, so that's standing. Yemenu l'satanu. So he's standing by his hand to satan him, to be a satan to him. It's just kind of funny. They're turning a noun into a verb here. Anyway, so yeah, he showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord, and the accuser standing at his right hand to accuse him again. And the Lord said to the accuser, right? The Lord said to over here, if you can see what's going on over here, Vayomer Adonai El Hasatan, right? The Lord said to the accuser, "The Lord rebuke you, O accuser." Right. So we've got this noun, Hasatan, said to the Satan, "The Lord rebuke you," and right. So we've got this label happening, right? This is a label. This is a role, a person, an embodiment. The Lord has chosen Jerusalem, who has chosen rebuke you. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. The Lord rebuke you, O accuser. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a brand plucked from the fire? Now, Joshua was wearing filthy clothes. This is a vision, right? As he stood before the angel said to those who were standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." And to him he said, "See, I have taken your guilt away from you, and I will clothe you with festal apparel." And he says, "Let them put a clean turban on his head." They put clean turban, la, 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 la. Right? So, so who is this accuser, right? It's this. I would need to read the previous chapter, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of these little prophets, to be honest. But anyway, so my point here, right? Even the English translations are not calling it Satan, right? It's not. There isn't a tradition here built up when you're talking about this character yet. We're still messing with this someone who's standing against you in some way, right? But it's anywhere near as clear as it is in Job, which is the next one to look at, right? So what do I have? Okay. Yeah. So this is the passage that that is well, it's most interesting in my opinion. Because it's an extended example, and it is let's just look at it. I don't need to talk about it. Let's just look at it. Right? Right. I feel like I should double check over here in the comments. This if I've misunderstood, please do correct me. You're thinking as an adverb, not a noun. I feel like I missed the thread there, but it is a recent comment. So, the the hasatan is a noun. It's this person, and then is standing against them to do this personness is what was going on in that one particular example. But yes. So let me come back to some of these comments. This is the stood against is basically double statement of opposition. Yes, I mean there's an element of standing against, right? Not just standing, just standing. You can stand anywhere, but standing against. So that is the role of the adversary in many of these verses, right? Many of these examples. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at Job then. Let's look at the Job passage. And this is one of my favorite stories to talk about because it is so often read through a very Christianized lens. And I just say that for my experiences. I have predominantly been in Christian spaces. So those are the people I've interacted with. If I grew up in a Jewish family attending synagogue, I would hear people talking about from a Jewish perspective. So I don't know what the typical, kind of Jewish perspective is on this. I'm so sorry. I don't know. And I'm talking about this through my experiences and trying to highlight for some people a new way to think about this. So we're just going to roll with that for now. What I think is helpful, though, is to set aside any sort of specific expectations about this character, Hasatan, because then you can see better what is actually happening here. I was trying to think, where's the... I don't remember which chapter I have the sidebar on Hasatan. I think it must be in cover-ups and edited stories, but I don't remember for sure. There's a sidebar on evil spirits from the Lord, which kind of relates to what we're talking about. Who killed Goliath? No. Oh, I didn't have it in here. Well, anyway, it's in here somewhere. I don't remember where I go. What really happened in the garden? Oh, because people think Satan is in the garden. I put the sidebar on Satan in chapter 3. So anyway, there's a decent little reference to this particular story, Job chapters 1 and 2 in sidebar in chapter 3 of Permission Granted. So there once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. Just the food bill for these animals alone, right? 500 yoke of oxen, so 1,000 ox. What? 500 donkeys and very many enslaved peoples. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. We're supposed to be in his corner, and we're supposed to be fond of him, I think. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Isn't that nice? And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said to himself, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts," knowing what happens when people get a little tipsy, right? This is what Job always did. So Job is such a good and righteous man, right? He interesting also to associate righteousness with a great deal of wealth, right? We should point that out. But also that he is so righteous that he even thinks about trying essentially doing some CYA, covering his ass with his children for his children on behalf of his children. Okay. So this is the guy this story starts out with. And this is why it's really important to understand what the book of Job was written to counter, right? Very briefly, the predominant worldview in the Jewish writings at this point, up to this point, embody what we see in the Deuteronomistic history, which is as long as you worship and follow God, things will go well. And in fact, things start to go badly when you don't. And so this idea of worshiping only God will lead to your benefit, and that when bad things start to happen, it's because somebody has stopped worshiping God correctly. Like that's very deeply ingrained in the writings. It's in the prophets themselves, the former prophets, the latter prophets. It's in the book of Deuteronomy for sure. And when I talk about the former and latter prophets, I'm talking about Joshua, Judges, right? First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, all of the prophets in terms of what Christians call prophets. We have this storyline that says this, right? So what Job as a part of the wisdom literature is doing in part is challenging that belief system. That if you do what is right in terms of worshiping only Yahweh, if you do what is right, you will be okay. God will bless you. God will protect you. Things will go well for you. And that when things start to go badly for you and your people, that's because somebody isn't doing what they're supposed to do. That's the premise that this book that we call Job was written to challenge. So what they have to do is set up a guy who is so righteous that there's no mistaking the fact that he has not stepped out of line, right? And in that state, in this story, they're going to take everything away from him because that's what happens. Like devastating life events happen. And they're challenging the idea that only happens to you if you stepped out of line. So they have to posit someone as, righteously good as Ned Flanders or whatever. Choose your character, right? Ridiculously righteous, upright and righteous person. They have to have that kind of a ridiculous person to start with in order for this whole setup to make any sense. Okay. So Job is this ridiculously over the top righteous man. Okay. So one day, the sons of God, that's what this says in the Hebrew, the sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, which is a thing, right? The heavenly beings, the sons of God, presented themselves before the Lord. I always like to think of it as like the morning, debriefing, what happened overnight, what are we up to today, and the accuser. So maybe I should pull up the parallel here. Maybe that would be helpful. Yeah. So one day, the heavenly beings over here in the Hebrew, so one day, Vayhi Hayom, and here are the sons of God came. The sons of God came and sat. That's that same Hithpael that we talked about before God. And Vayavogom Hasatan Betocham. So also, and he came also Hasatan in their midst. So Hasatan, this is the Satan. We're using, I know that this might not mean anything, and that's fine, but there's a definite article being used here. When we were using it before, it was not definitive. It was just Satan, not the Satan, as in the thing. But yeah, it's a nominative in the other cases, right? So also this being is in their midst. Here's the thing, folks. Why are we calling it the accuser? This makes me so cranky. It makes me so cranky because the role of this character is more like what we call the devil's advocate, which is messed up in and of itself because devil's advocate is actually much more positive than accuser or adversary. But this is where I'd like to remind you that I had an exchange with a very intelligent person who was the editor helping edit my work, my book, Permission Granted. And when it came to that sidebar on Satan, Hasatan, she was saying Hasatan means adversary. And I'm like, no, it does not. Not here. Okay. So one day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasatan also came among them. Hasatan was not stopped at the door. Hasatan was allowed in as among the heavenly beings or the sons of God, right? The Lord said to Hasatan, "Where have you come from?" Now, here's where it gets really interesting to me. This is all about tone. And how are you understanding this scene playing out? Because I tended to hear, some form of negativity being read onto the character Hasatan here. So where have you come from? Is that like, why are you here? Or, hey, what have you been up to? Right. And I like more like, hey, what have you come from? Like, what you been doing? Right. From God to Hasatan. And Hasatan answered, oh, just going to and fro on the earth, walking up and down on it, just checking things out. It's a pretty place, not, oh, I've been, back and forth trying to figure out who I could fuck with next. Like, no, just don't stop reading all the negativity onto this, right? Going to and fro on the earth, walking up and down. The Lord said to Hasatan, again, notice what effect it has on you when this character is being called the accuser. Right? I would rather they just say Hasatan. But anyway, but accuser, is he actually being an accuser in this story? I'm going to come back to you on that. So the Lord said, well, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. What do you have to say about him? Then Hasatan answered the Lord, well, does Job fear God for nothing? I mean, have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. Duh! Of course he loves you. And again, remember the context. They're trying to establish this utterly righteous man, right? Because it's men that we care about. And right. And so the character here is not an accuser. The character here is helping us get to the truth of the situation, right? This is a necessary character. We absolutely need him to be pushing back on God's seeming cluelessness. I mean, God seems a bit naive here, right? That's okay. I don't think, if there is such a thing as God, I don't think God is naive. But that's a part of the story here, so we can get to what's going on. So we can flush out the fact that people are dealing with life tragedies, and they don't like the reasoning they've been given. And so they're setting this up. Okay. So does God fear God for nothing? You've da-da-da-da-da. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has. I bet he'll curse you to your face. Like, we're setting up the premise here, folks. Imagine yourself in a similar situation, right? Your friend is pushing back. Your friend is saying, I'm not so sure it's that he's all that righteous, really. You've blessed his work. You've blessed him in his works. That's why he's so grateful. That's why he's so righteous. And the Lord said to Hasatan, very well. Okay, let's put it to the test. Let's see if you're right. And God is in on it. Okay, very well. All that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him physically. That's what's going on in that language. Do not stretch out your hand against him. Don't take his life, which would really defeat the purpose anyway, right? So Hasatan went out from the presence of the Lord. This, I'm not kidding you. I'm so cranky over this right now. Why are they calling him the accuser? This is not inappropriate. I'd love to know what suggestions you all have for this instead of accuser. I'm going to keep reading and then come back and see if y'all have some clever suggestions here, because I'm sure one or two of you do. So what we see next then is the destruction of everything, almost everything in his possession. So one day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were blowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them and plowing. Sorry, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants, the enslaved people, with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up. Oh, this is so hard to even read. The sheep and all the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you. So we've gotten the oxen, the donkeys, the sheep, all the enslaved people working with them. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels and carried them off and killed the enslaved people, tending them with the edge of the sword. I have alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still, a 4th person came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and fell on the young people, and they're dead. I alone have escaped to tell you. In one fell swoop of whatever, a week, a month, whatever, everything is gone. Everything listed at the very beginning of the story has been killed or taken away. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. It's an interesting way of talking about the earth, isn't it? The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. This is one of the most often misquoted out of context verses in the whole Bible. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Okay, I'm just going to cut to the chase on this one. His wife talks back to that and says, curse God and die. If this God, the God that does these things to you, if this is what God does, is do all these things, then tell that one to fuck off. And I think that's an appropriate response to all this. What's interesting to me, though, is this reaction to devastation and the reiteration of this idea that a lot of people do have, and I know a lot of Christians are taught to have this response to devastation, response to really terrible life developments, to say God's ways are higher than ours, to believe that every single thing is in God's hand. And so when devastating things happen, God allowed it somehow for some reason, and there's got to be a better purpose. God had something in mind. Like, I think that's utter bullshit, and that needs to go the way of the dinosaurs. But it's interesting how this is an early attempt to challenge that way of thinking, right? And it's not, Job is living up to his kind of saccharine, overly righteous persona, right? Are we tracking? And so they kind of drive it home here. And all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. So you've got nothing on him. You do not get to say. Job is still utterly righteous, right? And so then we have another round of it in chapter 2. So I'm not going to read all of that because you get the idea. But notice the language is the same as in chapter 1. On one day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasatan also came among them to present himself to the Lord. Like, Hasatan is welcome at this daily briefing. And in fact, Hasatan is the one that God turns to first. I mean, it's really, really striking to me that people have such negative associations with this character. And this, again, I'm going to comment, it makes me cranky, calling him the accuser. He's not. That is an inaccurate representation of what this character is doing, right? So, same thing. Where have you come from? Where have you been? I've been walking around. Have you considered my servant Job? And blah, blah, blah. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Again, this is reading it that way is a literalistic read and missing the nuances and the purpose and the point of this book. And I cannot tell you how many people I have encountered in intro courses to the Hebrew Bible who cannot get past thinking about this literally. And I understand that. I understand that because this is a story that they've been taught to read, think of very literally, right? But and Christians in particular are taught to see this character Hasatan as the devil incarnate, and that does happen in the Newer Testament, but that's a combination of ideas and characters, and it's not what's going on here. It's really, really important to me to establish that this character is essential, and this character drops out after chapter 2, and everything else is in God's hands. The whole rest of the book. Okay. So Hasatan was like, well, okay, let's try this, take his health away from him too. Only just do not take his life. You can take his health, just do not take his life. So Hasatan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot down to the crown of his head. To the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes, scraping all of his sores. Hello, little kitty. Then his wife said to him, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. This is the early version of tell God to bleep off, right? Curse God and die. And then he's like, oh, you speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive good from God and not receive evil? Again, they're playing out this tension that exists, right? And Job is representing a whole bunch of people who, who've lived according to that worldview, that if, and so he is persisting in his ridiculousness, and that serves a purpose, right? And what happens is in the next, I know what happens, starting in chapter 3 of Job is this long narrative, a very different kind of a style. And it's this long narrative of all of his, his friends that come to visit him, friends who give him reason after reason after reason to prove that he has not done anything that would the censure of the Lord would be the response. He has not done anything. So this is Job's character is essential to proving the point that these wisdom-centered writings are trying to challenge. They're trying to challenge the worldview, the standing worldview that says that God will protect you and bless you and make great things happen as long as you worship him. And when something starts to go badly, it's your fault. You've done something to deserve that. I know. She's really adamant today, so she's going to join us. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here and see what you all have decided. See if you've come up with any roles besides as a counter to, instead of calling Hasatan the accuser, what would you call him? I don't know if you all kind of had a little chit chat about that while I was over there, because I was in a screen where I couldn't see all of your comments. So you guys are fun. I can't. I'm not gonna. What am I laughing at? I'm laughing at this one, just so you guys know. Righteous, shut up and take it. I mean, yeah, that's exactly that's kind of it. That's kind of it. Okay. So did anyone come up with a suggestion for? Yeah, oh my gosh. I'm so glad you're here again, Firesight. I wanted to tell you, I didn't know how to let you know that I did listen to that lecture that you asked me to take a listen to, and the Sumerian woman. It's great. And I love that it's a male scholar, doing that presentation. And I don't remember if you had specific questions about it. I just thought it was really, yeah. People who are in ancient Near Eastern languages and cultures beyond just the Hebrew Bible tend to be a little bit more open-minded and can see those kinds of things and celebrate those roles for women a little bit easier, because people who are really attached to the Hebrew Bible and the Newer Testament tend to go into Hebrew Bible, not to the other cultures and people in the ancient Near East. So some of you may have died, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's so many pieces to the story that are so troubling, right? And this is also an interesting thing at the very end of the story. God in the final chapter, God gives him twice as many kids as he had before, which is, you don't get to replace children with more children, right? And it's right. It's a good point. Why would he want 4? Anyway, so do we have any suggestions? Doubter, tester. Um, I like doubter, and tester is probably safe. I'd say it's a safe suggestion. It doesn't have the same issue as accuser, right? Someone testing God, and again, it's the role of the devil's advocate, right, is to make sure we don't miss something, make sure we're considering more than just our own perspective, right? So I can see why you suggest doubter. Uh, is there someone? Did I miss something else? It looks like not. Yep. Okay. Let's see. Were there other suggestions? Yeah, God is the antagonist. What? Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Now, let's see. Let me see. I was trying to look at this now. How should I comfort Job? Should I say, I'm sorry, it went a bit too far? Fuck that. I'll shout at him now how great I am and that he's an ant that has no right to question me. Yeah, that's nicely said. I certainly agree with that. And it's, it's also worth noting that in like up to the last couple chapters are a tag on, right? So the first 2 and the last 2 are kind of from a different perspective than the middle 40 chapters or 38 chapters or whatever. And the thing is, in the book of Job, who are you to question me is kind of what's going on in there. And yeah, God does rant and rave at him for a couple chapters. But it's not a perfect handling of it, right? Because people were still are afraid to challenge or question God to a certain degree. It's worth noting for sure that the God described in the book of Job is still very violent, is still somewhat petty, is not, like there's a thing about like needing, I mean, I think there's a way to be in awe of the universe that doesn't require that you feel like an ant. Like I do feel like an ant when I think about the solar systems in the universe. Like I do, the galaxies and things, and I think that's appropriate. But this feeling like dirt, I don't know. I mean, the way God is described in the book of Job is still very problematic for me. But so I like the way you said that. Let's see. Oh my gosh. I find it incredibly interesting that Hasatan never touched or hurt Job's woman. I will say woman because it's not wife. There is no word for wife in the Hebrew Bible. I guess that wouldn't have hurt Job enough to make him curse God. Right? Because there are plenty more where that came from. Oh, I love it. Yes, my sweet Minerva. I decided not to worry about it when she came in here. Yes, this is the lecture, The Sumerian Woman by Samuel Noah Kramer on YouTube, right? If you want to listen to it, it's not a video, and it's just an audio, but it's a recording from like I think it's the late 1960s. I mean, it's impressive that they thought to record it. I'm glad that they did. It's a fantastic lecture on the role of women in Sumerian, not Sumerian. And when I first saw your thing, I was thinking Sumerian because I'm thinking of Newer Testament, but you're talking about Sumer, Sumer, Sumerian woman is what you were saying. I just, it's funny how I just think about things through my New Testament lenses sometimes. Okay. God's critic. We'll take that. Satan's a bit of a scientist. Hasatan's a bit of a scientist, right? Trying to be a little bit more like, well, technically speaking, is that what you mean? Yeah, I'll take that. contrarian. That might be a little bit more appropriate than accuser. And it is contrary without it being necessarily a terrible thing, right? God's critic, the pragmatist, the philosopher. I like those too, I have to say. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to make anyone feel embarrassed for what you've suggested. That is certainly not my intention. But yeah, thank you all very much. Just lets me know that something was connecting. So I just realized that we didn't do anything in the Newer Testament. So I do want to cover those as well, because I think it's helpful for people to have the conversation. This is the Hebrew Bible precedent. We have looked at all of the references, as far as I know. I'm pretty sure we covered, or at least talked about them briefly. All of the references to Satan in the Hebrew Bible. I think I might have left one out. Oh, that was the one I couldn't find. So anyway, no, we looked at that. Sorry. So yes, we didn't look at 1 Kings 11:14, but we looked at 1 Kings 11:23 and 25, and the 14. It was all the same kind of thing. So the point here is to look at this role of this character, or this label of some sort, right? When it's a person being referred to as Satan, it is describing what they're doing. And then we have this character, Satan, who shows up in a couple places in First Chronicles, so a very late writing. This character pushes David to do something that he's not supposed to do, right? Take a census. Terrible. And then we have in the book of Job, this Satan character. And the translation I was just looking at, this was the New Revised Standard Version updated edition, which was just recently, as in within the last 2 years, updated. And they made some really fascinating changes when they made the updated version. And I mean, I honestly think I might drop my friend an email. I'm like, what the hell happened here? Why did you go with accuser? Because I do know at least one person on the committee. So maybe I'll drop her an email. Because I'm so disappointed in that. I can't even wrap my head around it. Okay, so that's different, right? So there's where we're starting. And then there are a couple hundred years between these writings and when we get to the reference to this character in the Newer Testament. Since we're already over an hour, I'm going to put the rest of this on hold. So we'll start with Newer Testament references. They're just a handful to look at, but it is kind of interesting. And they are absolutely actively combined in the book of Revelation. So we've got a character who's doing something here, and then we're just directly combining them, saying Satan is the same as the devil, but they're not. So John, in his little trip, his little mushroom-induced trip or whatever, makes some careless associations between the devil and Satan that people today are still living with. So, and then there was that TikTok that Dan McClellan responded to, the reference to Satan, where Satan lives. So we'll look at that next time. That is just me, which will be in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to have Katie Valentine, a New Testament professor who also does some life coaching these days. She's shifted her work a little bit, but she'll be on here next Thursday to talk. 2 weeks out, I'll be back on the 21st. I'm not sure if I have anyone else on the 20. Oh, right. And then the 28th, we have another New Testament professor coming on, Lynn Huber, who teaches at Elon University now, in North Carolina. And she does a lot of work with the apocalypse, actually, with Revelation, which is like my least favorite thing to talk about. So it's always nice to have someone else who likes to talk about it come on and offer some really interesting insights. Lynn is definitely a queer biblical scholar, and also does queer readings and engagements with scripture. So it'll be really fun to have her on. I will have thumbnails up for those two scholars here shortly. Thank you so much for joining me. Those of you who wanted to be here live, and were wanted to be able to be, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all the ways that you all support me. subscribing, sharing links with friends, telling people about the work I've done, not just here in terms of videos, but also the books I've written that I think are really helpful for people who are doing deconstructing work. My book, Permission Granted, was written essentially before I knew what deconstructing was written to help people kind of cut those attachments and to have a healthier, more mature relationship to the Bible. My latest book out, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? Again, I'm trying to help people have a better understanding of what's going on in the Bible first, and then decide what to do with those passages now. That's what I'm up to in general. So telling people about these things, the audio of Permission Granted, I did the audio for that, that you can access on Amazon, Audible, all kinds of great things. And then the Patreon supporting me, lots of different people supporting me, various amounts that people are able to afford. And I appreciate every single one. And those who do support me are included in a live conversation. I send out a Zoom link to those who support me through Patreon. And my Patreon handle is Biblical Bird. And so 2 weeks from tonight will be the next live conversation. So I get to chat with you all and not just me talk at you and hope that I'm able to respond to your comments or whatever in a timely fashion, or at least understand what you're getting at. So there's a poll up, or a questionnaire up, if you want to go chime in on, if you're interested in joining us, and let me know what topic you'd like to talk about. I'll be kind of taking cues from everybody that way this next time, see how that goes. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you all next